Welcome to the Quest Forums channel, and in today's video I wanted to talk about Revelation. And by that I don't mean the book at the end of the Bible in this particular video, but rather just the idea of Revelation itself, what we define as God describing himself to us. And not only that, but Revelation is actually broken down into two different types by theologians. There's general revelation, which is what we can all see in nature, and then there's also special revelation, which is what is given in Scripture, God talking directly to us through his prophets. And there's a lot of examples of both of these in the Bible, but I wanted to look at one in particular today, Psalm 19, because it actually goes into a decent bit of depth on both forms of revelation. And it's interesting for doing so. You have verses 1 through 6 that discuss general revelation, that talk about God's work through nature, and then verses 7 through 11 that describe special revelation, that talk about God's instructions in the scriptures. And that break that occurs between verses 6 and 7 is so sudden, so sharp, that it's almost off-putting. It's kind of jarring until you again recognize that the theme is really the same. It's talking about how God has given us knowledge about himself that we couldn't have if he didn't care to let us know about his presence. So for general revelation first, this is what anyone can know by observation. Anyone can look at nature, can look at the cosmos, and see signs that there is a creator out there. And one of the first keys to this is just the ability that we have to rationalize, to use reason. Our consciousness enables us to organize parts of our lives. And because we have that ability, we can also recognize organization in the rest of the universe around us. And that's not imposing when we do that. We are not imposing our ability to reason onto nature and seeing it where it isn't there, because to begin with, we have it. The fact that we are able to reason is a sign that that needs to have a source. It really can't be explained by purely natural elemental processes, material processes. It has to come from somewhere else to be able to be organized in and of itself. So that is one thing that already points to a creator. It's actually one of the arguments for the existence of God. But then you do have those things that we recognize, those things like the laws of physics or the language of DNA, things that we tend to describe in very sterile, mundane terms, but that are really rather wondrous when you do think about it. It's just considering the fact that the same laws, the same ideas that hold all the stars in the universe together and all the galaxies, they also bind atoms to one another. So from the great to the very small, those things apply everywhere. Or then again, talking about DNA, that we see so much variety in life on this planet, and yet it's still organized by the same code. These things go to show elements of design, elements of law. And they really cannot be random. They work together too well, too consistently. They have a reliability that a chaotic universe could not be expected to supply for us. And so those are things, again, that point us, when we're willing to look, to the fact that there must be a mind behind them. They must have some type of source beyond themselves, beyond pure chance. We can see God at work in the order of the universe. The fact that there are rules implies that there must be a rule maker. It's just natural to come to that conclusion. It's what makes the most sense on the evidence that we have. And it's not as if it's a purely modern notion. This is something that the ancients understood as well. It's what we see here in Psalm 19. David writes in verses 5 and 6, "The sun is like a bridegroom coming from his home. It rejoices as an athlete running a course. It rises from one end of the heavens and circles to their other end. Nothing is hidden from its heat." And he's talking about, again, that reliability, that idea that we can count on the sun rising and setting every day. We can count on the seasons. We can count on the days. We can count on gravity. Those sorts of things that, again, if everything were totally random, how could you count on it? How could you have science if you didn't know that the rules were always going to be applied? And even if they get stretched, that they don't get broken, that there are laws in place. This points to a creator. This points us to God, when we're willing to see that. And it's the same recognition, just different ways of talking about it. We use more technical language, and David's more poetic, but it's that understanding that someone is in control. Someone has set it all up to operate this way. So that's general revelation. But general revelation does not get you all the way to God. You can't fully understand him. We're too limited to fully understand him even with special revelation. But at least with special revelation, we can know something directly about him from him. And that's the idea behind this form of God revealing himself. And David does kind of discuss the need for this, beginning very early, even in his section on general revelation, in verses 2 and 3. He says, "Day after day the heavens pour out speech. Night after night they communicate knowledge. There is no speech, there are no words, their voice is not heard." Now, that sounds contradictory, but it's not, because what he's saying is that nature, general revelation, is a very subtle expression. It doesn't speak in such a way that it can't be avoided. We can ignore it. We can miss the point. And that is what happens to all of us. The sin drowns out our ability. The noise in our own minds and our own hearts keeps us from being able to hear God speak that way. And Paul also talks about this in another passage that talks about general and special revelations in Romans chapter 1 rather, and he discusses this idea that people, because they've blinded themselves, they start to worship the creation instead of the creator. That's where all this idea comes from, that we need special revelation in order to be able to get past that self-blindness. Special revelation supplements and improves upon general revelation. We are not able to reach up to God. We do not have the power, the intelligence, the strength to be able to go up to him to communicate with him. So instead, we need him to reach down if there's going to be any type of relationship. And thankfully, that's exactly what he's done. That's what the Bible gives us. He has told us what we cannot discover on our own. And most important of those things, obviously, is the work of Jesus Christ. The life that he lived and his sacrificial death and his resurrection that makes it possible for us to be redeemed to God. That's the most important element of Scripture. But all of it, through the centuries that it was recorded, was God's way of telling us about himself and what he expected of us and of the love that he has for us. And it's all necessary. We cannot do without special revelation. We cannot avoid death, eternal death, without what God has shown us. And that's why David can say, I'm paraphrasing from verse 7, of Psalm 19, that's what can renew one's life. That's what can make the inexperienced wise. We need Scripture to actually be able to live the life that we are intended to by God. We're lost without it, but because God cares for us, because he loves us, he gave it so that we could be found. And that's why, with David, it's something that we should prize above all things. Now, maybe at some point while I've been talking here, you opened up a Bible and went and found Psalm 19. If you did, maybe you noticed that there's a few verses I haven't mentioned yet, verses 12 through 14 of that psalm. And that's because they're basically the synthesis of everything that we've covered so far. That creation and Scripture speak together to tell us that we are nothing on our own, that we are too small and too weak to be able to save ourselves, and that we need God for that. The reason why we're in a position where we need salvation is because we have been blinded by our willfulness. But God can cure us of that. He's not left us totally ignorant. He has spoken to us, and we can be healed. We can be cleansed by Jesus Christ. We just have to be willing to listen to him. And it really does take both. It's important to remember that we need both types of revelation, general and special, because nature on its own will never be able to lead anyone fully to God, tell them everything that they need to know. There are things that special revelation are required to know, that you can't just see by stargazing. But also, someone's not going to just hear the Bible and be convinced by it on its own. They're going to have to see how what Scripture says is true in accordance with what they observe of the world around them and of what they observe in their hearts. And as for people who become Christians, we are to know that the Bible is the rule and the guide for our life, but we need general revelation too. We need to be able to look at the world around us to recognize that it's God's canvas, that it shows his creative genius. And so I think as a good note to finish is just to suggest that take some time to appreciate both types, to see that God is awesome, whether it's through the world that he's created or whether it's through the Scripture that he's delivered. And just really focus on that and see how he's been talking to you so that you can understand the love that he has for you, because that is really what it's all about, is that he loves us. And because of his love, we are able to glorify him. That's the purpose of our creation. And everything around us says that, and we need to know it. So that brings us to the end of today's video, and I thank you very much for checking it out. I hope that there's something here that's been educational, edifying to you. If you have any questions about the Bible, I would love to hear them. That's the purpose of this ministry, is to be able to give people a place where they can ask their questions and hopefully find answers. And as I've said before, I cannot promise the answers. I don't have them all myself, but I'm more than happy to help you look. There are some links in the description below, places that you can reach out and get in touch. So again, thank you very much for checking this out. That brings us to the end, but until next time, keep looking up.